Hey guys, it's Pete from Pete's Anxiety here, the mental health podcast, breaking the stigma that mental health is talked about in. Welcome in today's episode. Before we get started today, we need to cover a few things really quick. Let's talk about the Pete Anxiety Patreon first off. It's only $1, guys. $1. What does $1 get you? $1 gets you into the exclusive episodes I am recording currently. I'm actually focusing on certain different diagnoses of things to show you guys what it actually looks like as it manifests in a person. So why not for $1, judges? Yeah, they said $1. I just checked with them too. See, they said it was okay. It was $1 anyways. Let's also talk about the Oracle Talk Radio Networks app. In case you can't be here live listening to me, watching this video, supporting the show, you can listen to it on the radio app. Why not? It connects us live to our 365 radio. Just go to your app stores and download the Oracle Talk Radio Network. You'll see the big old Oracle Talk Radio Network app logo right on there. Download it and it'll connect you to me, 10 a.m. Central Standard Time, 3 p.m. Central Standard Time, to Pete vs. Anxiety when I'm live doing my thing right here, informing the world and raising mental health awareness. So where are you going to be? 10 a.m. Of course. Come on. We just talked about this. Pay attention for once. Damn. Do y'all know how to listen? And as always, guys, like, follow, and share the YouTube channel. If you guys like what you're seeing, leave some comments, man. We want to know. I want to know if you like what you're on. You want to be on the show? Let me know. Hit me up at PeteVersusAnxietyPod@gmail.com. And as always, guys, enjoy the show. And by the way, did I mention to like, share, and subscribe to the YouTube channel as well? Yeah, okay. I just want to make sure because some of y'all are hard of hearing in the back, may have to yell loud or get a megaphone or something. But, anyways, let's get today's show started. Y'all have a great one. Enjoy.
Guys, hello, welcome into another exciting episode of Pete vs. Anxiety. My guest today proves that it doesn't matter how hard you fall, it's how you get back up. Please welcome the one, the only, Blake Hunt. Blake, how you doing today, bud?
Pretty good. How about yourself?
Not too bad, man. So Blake is here to tell us a very interesting story now. Blake had been through 14 lethal levels of blood alcohol, and he is still here today. So he wants to come share his story with us. Blake, take the floor from me, bud.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
Oh, for sure, man. I appreciate you being here.
Yeah, so I guess the last 5 years have been a mixed bag, you would say. So I spent the first 2 of those years in and out of the hospital. I had developed a pretty severe case of alcoholism and all of the mental health side effects that come along with that. And I kind of found myself in this cycle of 30 days sober. I'd relapse, I'd drink myself into the hospital, and I'd do it all over again the next month. And at the end of those 14 trips, I decided to do something a little bit different. I came to the place I'm sitting in right now as a client, and I asked for help. So I went to treatment, I asked for help, and almost the last 3 years of my life I've spent on the recovery side of this thing. So it's been a really special thing for me to come back to the place that I went through as a client, to come here and kind of see people in the same situation I was in. Maybe no hope, no goals, no thoughts of what their life can be, and see all of that change. So it's been a really powerful experience for me. Obviously wish I didn't have to go through a lot of the pain that I went through, but I'm grateful for it because it ended up with me being here today. So
No, that's awesome though, man. You went back to where you started. The fact that you've been through it, I bet you that helps you connect with people too, because people are like, hey, listen, Blake's been through this. He knows what I'm dealing with. This is not just some person trying to sell me some kind of dream of, oh, hey, listen, you'll get through this. Listen, if your story is going to inspire somebody out there, they're going to be like, man, if Blake did it, I can do it too, you know?
Yeah, it's, I have, let's see, I work with 6 other therapists here, and about half of us have been through it ourselves and half of them haven't.
Yeah.
I think we all carry a similar trait in that we're able to empathize with people. When you enter into treatment after a substance abuse issue, you're not exactly the nicest person. So people usually come in, they're kind of assholes, they're grumpy, they don't want to be here. And so you have to be able to find like empathy and compassion for what they're going through, right? Somebody doesn't drink themselves to death unless they really hate their life,
Yeah.
to get to that point, a lot of things have to happen. And so I think while it's not a requirement to go through it, it certainly helps because it gives me kind of that natural ability to empathize with where they are in that given moment and give them some space to kind of start to heal from it.
Yeah, and that's the great thing about it, though. Is like I said, though, you've been there, so it's like you can relate to these guys, and I think a lot of people that's really great for them, though. They want to know that, hey, listen, he's been through this kind of thing, so now it's like, okay, and I'm sure it's a lot easier to connect with people because you understand exactly what they're dealing with at that time. You're like, okay, well, this is probably right about where you're at on this level in this little journey of just unpleasantry, obviously, and things like that. So I think it's great, honestly, man. I'm happy to hear that, you're still here because obviously you're making a positive impact in people's lives.
Yeah, well, thank you. I think it's interesting with substance abuse. I think originally we kind of looked at it as like a moral failing. If
Yeah.
this guy really loved his family, then he probably wouldn't get drunk in the garage every night. And I think that stigma has largely changed. I think as a society, we've done a pretty good job. Enough of us have been affected by this thing that we rarely look at it as a moral failing.
Yeah.
And so the next thing we've done with addiction is we look at it as like a cognitive behavioral therapy problem. We look at, okay, how are you thinking about alcohol? And let me change that. How are you thinking about certain situations? And how do I get you to reframe and think about that differently? And while all that's great and they are useful tools, what we know about addiction is that it's usually rooted in some form of trauma, some
Hmm.
form of distress when you were a younger child. And in order to get through that, you can't think your way through it. So I think a lot of cognitive techniques are useful, but not necessarily upfront. And so the work I do here kind of on the front lines and in someone's first 30, 60, 90 days of treatment is really to get behind and not necessarily change the behavior, but try to figure out what's driving the behavior in the first place. And what we'll find 9 times out of 10 is there's been a significant trauma or there's been a significant period of events that made me go from one path to the other. Wasn't a conscious choice. It wasn't something I decided to do. It was something that naturally happened in the course of my life, and I adapted. I coped the best I could in that moment and had no idea how it would turn out, but that coping mechanism ends up trying to kill me at some point.
Yeah, no, and that's completely understandable, though. It's like you're getting to the root of the problem, and a lot of times the people use alcohol to try and silence those problems. It's like, hey, if I get drunk, then I can forget about these problems temporarily. Am I not right when I'm thinking of that aspect of it, though?
Yeah, I mean, to a certain extent, alcoholism becomes a singular pathway in the brain. So it becomes our reward when things are going well, and it also becomes our reward when things are going bad. Now, the longer your alcoholism or your drug abuse lasts, the more problems you have. So naturally, you're drinking away bad memories, you're drinking away bad behaviors, but it doesn't always start that way, right?
Yeah.
Um, a lot of times it is those good times that make us drink the most, right? So it's more of just a singular reward pathway that we've developed in the brain, whether it's a good thing or a bad thing. We only want one thing at the end of the day, and that's alcohol and drugs.
Right. That victory beer at the end of the day, or, you deal
Yeah.
in customer service and it's like, man, I got to go home and drink. A lot of people say that, but people don't realize, some of these people that are drinking like heavy amounts, like they're doing a lot. Like it's
Mhm.
crazy to see if you even think about it, really, honestly. But it's just like, that to us it's different. For anybody that hasn't had an addiction, it's harder for some of them a lot of times to understand what people are going through because it's hard. It's like, hey, why don't you just stop? Well, that's great. I'm glad that's some advice you got for me. But you just can't just stop. It's kind of hard to do once you get hooked, It's I
Yeah.
wish it was simpler than that.
Yeah. And if we're all honest with ourselves, we've all experienced some sort
Hmm.
of addiction in our life. Some of us develop addictions that try to kill us. but others of us have addictions like food. We have addictions like television. We have addictions like video games. We have addictions like porn, gambling. Um, that sweet you have at the end of the night as a reward. We all have these things we go to as a reward for good behavior. We have a reward we go to when we're not feeling well. It's just that certain people develop it over a very harmful substance. But if
Yeah,
you really look at your life, like I guarantee all of us have had some sort of coping mechanism that maybe wasn't the healthiest for us in our life.
yeah, that's true. Yeah, I had a video game addiction for a while. I ended up having to get rid of my system at one point
Yeah.
because I was just so hooked on it. And I feel like it's the same way with the internet too. Now that you got all these different apps and everything, it's like, I literally turn my phone on silent because sometimes it was like before it was like I was having a panic attack because I wasn't checking my messages right away. Oh God, I gotta go look at it. So addiction comes in many forms. We're not just talking alcohol, drugs. You could be addicted to, like you said, pornography. That was an interesting. I actually had an interesting conversation with somebody about that one too, and he was a really great guy and everything like that too. His name was GT Tan. Me and him had a long hour-long conversation about it, and trust me, it was more interesting than you would have realized because you found out so many things along the way of different patterns of things that people would do. And and the same thing with food. Like when you talk about your relationship with food, a lot of people don't realize the food you eat it can affect your mental health as well too, man. If you're not taking care of yourself, you're not going to be in the greatest state of mind because you keep putting all that junk in and you don't put anything good in. It's just not going to lead you anywhere great.
Yeah. As human beings, we're designed or purpose built to look at the immediate reward versus the long term, and so most of us struggle when we try to look at long-term consequences that maybe we don't experience right now. So you think about someone who smokes a cigarette.
Mm-hmm.
Most people who smoke a cigarette know that eventually it will catch up to them, but it's not catching up to them today. Today it's just a brief reprieve from whatever's going on in their life, or it's that moment of pause. And so they smoke the cigarette, and then the next time they need it in 2 hours, they go out and smoke that cigarette again. And it's
Yeah.
the same thing with any other compulsive behavior. If you look at porn, ultimately we're looking for some sort of escape or some form of reward. And we think about, okay, is this going to feel good right now? The answer is yes. And so we engage. We don't take that moment to think of, okay, if this becomes a repetitive pattern, how will this affect my life moving forward? How will it affect the intimacy with my wife? How will it affect my mental state? How will it affect all of these different things in my life? We just aren't built to think like that. And so, working with a therapist or working with somebody allows you to take a long-term view and say, okay, like I can see how giving into this compulsion day after day after day is ultimately adding up to more negative consequences in my life than I'm resolving in the moment. Right. At the end of the day, I'm creating more pain for myself, even though I'm kind of getting this temporary high.
Yeah, yeah, and and I think people look at the outcome, and a lot of us don't look to the future to see what the later outcomes are. Like you said, cigarettes, and then the porn thing gets really interesting after a while. Because they start getting into weirder stuff. Is what me and GT were talking about. He was like, yeah, he's like, you'll be surprised that most of them get into this other category, and I'm like, what? What? He's like, yeah, they'll all deny it. They'll all deny it. Say they never. Oh no, that's not my thing. But they're watching it though. That's the thing. Like they're just so drawn to it regardless of the fact, that, they don't think they think it's a problem. Everybody else are telling it's a problem, but really in secrecy, they're watching it. And he was like, it's not like they watch it every single day. He said it could just be over a period of time, just like how much they view, like you said, if they just keep repeating the habit and things like that, which is interesting because a lot of times when people think you say addiction, it's like, oh, that's all they're constantly doing. No, it's not like that. He said, he's like, it happens more often, but not as much as a lot of people would think it is. It's not just a every day they're watching kind of thing. He said that's not the same thing either. And I was like, that was interesting to me because it's like a lot of times when you hear addiction, it's like every single day they're going to repeat the process every single day, but not in that situation. It's a little bit different.
Yeah. Yeah. When you look at substance abuse as a diagnosis or any kind of abuse, it's not time bound. And
Yeah.
so the diagnosis has nothing to do with how often or how
Hmm.
long you're drinking for, or how long you're engaging in the negative behavior. It's more tied to the disruption in that person's life. And so, if this behavior is leading to a significant number of consequences or negative outcomes in your life, that's what dictates a substance abuse diagnosis. So it's not what we tend to think of in our head. It's not the guy that wakes up and immediately goes down to his bar and starts drinking at 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
Sure, that person probably has a problem too, but the guy who comes home at 5 o'clock and still goes to work every morning, but then he drinks till he blacks out at 9 o'clock, and doesn't have a relationship with his wife, doesn't have a relationship with his kids. He's also got a significant substance abuse problem. Those two are
Yeah.
not different, you know?
Well, you got to think about though too, Blake. A lot of people watch movies, and a lot of movies portray a lot of these things as other things or TV shows. The ones that come to mind is like Radio Flyer. Remember when the dad came home, was drinking, and he was abusive to the younger brother. And it was interesting to see because he was drinking all the time. Every time he saw him, he had a beer in hand. And then the other one I think it was like Frank Gallagher from Shameless. How like he was just constantly doing. You know what I'm saying? Like these different things depict these things, and I think
Yeah.
it may be right a little bit, but it's not always right, And I feel like that's what a lot of people get their information from. As they're seeing
Yeah.
these things, they're like, "Oh, this is what it's like." Or this person has all these open beer bottles and all this other stuff just sitting around them at the house, and it's like it doesn't always act like that. Like you said, it could be just somebody coming home at the end of the day and just throwing a few back or whatever. It gets so blackout drunk they don't remember anything. And then it's like, we as kids, we used to think that was funny. Well, oh, yeah, man, oh, man, I got party. You should have seen him go. But really, it's like it's a self-destructive behavior, but they don't
Mhm.
see it that way because it's like a glory to the rest of us. I remember that when we used to do that before, man. You all get excited. You're like, oh, yeah, you see what Pete did the other day? Yeah, man, he got crazy and did this and that. And it's like, yeah, that's really not that great now that you look at it.
Yeah. During the worst period of my life, the period where I was drinking the most and things were falling apart behind the scenes,
Yeah,
I was living in Park City, Utah. I was a 5-minute drive from some of the nicest ski resorts in the state of Utah or in the country. Like I was making a significant amount of money. I mean, if you looked at my LinkedIn page, you'd be like, this guy is killing it right now. And
right.
I wasn't, like I'd go home and I'd drink myself to death because I just hated my life so much.
Yeah,
So I wasn't Frank Gallagher sleeping under a bridge and pissing my pants. On
yeah,
the
yeah,
outside, I presented as something completely different,
right.
but within the four walls of my own head, life was a nightmare. And I think
Yeah,
that's what we often underestimate is that people can put on a mask. People can put on a facade of what they want you to see about their life, sometimes for significant periods, right? And that doesn't mean that what's going on behind the scenes isn't extremely dangerous and extremely harmful to that person. So you really never know. Most of the people I meet in addiction would not fit the Frank Gallagher criteria.
right.
They more align with your everyday person that was going to work, but they had this significant problem that was killing them behind the scenes.
Yeah, yeah. Like you said, your headspace. You don't know what people are thinking a lot of times, and we don't all. We can't read minds, so we don't know what people are thinking. They could say, "Oh, I'm good," and things like that. "Oh, I'm okay, I'm fine," and they'll just keep telling you they're fine, but really they're not. And we wouldn't even know a lot of times. They're whatever they do in the four walls of their house. Like you said, you're at home doing this stuff. No one else had any idea. You went to work you went out function in society. But when you came home, you just continued to go because you were, you just hated your life that much. But like no one would have known until you said something. And it's happened a couple times on this show, though. I've had a couple people on that started revealing things, and people are just like, "Oh, dude, I didn't even know that was going to happen." It's the same thing presented as, "Oh, they had all these things going for them, all these great things." You would have thought they had it all together, but really, deep down inside their head, it was a complete war zone in there.
Yeah, it's a disease that survives in isolation. So the disease, I guess I should back up. Some people believe it's a disease, some people don't believe it's a disease. To be honest, I don't really know. What I
Yeah,
do know though is that it does something to the brain that convinces you not to ask for help. It convinces you that you need to be alone, and it convinces you to prioritize that substance above all other
Yeah.
things. And the result of that is that you end up to being this extremely lonely person that doesn't know where to go other than to the bottle or to the substance itself. And so I think that progression of isolation and ultimately feeling like if I tell people what's truly going on, they'll think about me differently, they'll look at me
Exactly.
differently, is what keeps so many of us from reaching out for help. You know, there's many stats that say only about 5% of people that truly have a substance use problem ever get a chance to fix it. You know, most people live with this thing every single day. They never reach out for help, and it just destroys their life without interruption for the majority of their time.
5%. Wow.
Mhm.
Wow. Okay. That's an insane statistic because only 5%, you know, get it's sad. It really is. It's sad. I think
Mhm.
it's one of those problems that not enough people worry about. And I like how you were talking about how they're isolating and things like that. Because if you were to tell somebody what you're thinking, just like you just said, they would have looked at you like, whoa, hold up, hang on. And a lot of people are ready for that conversation. So let me ask you
Mhm.
this though, like for people that are worried about their friends and may think they have addictions or things like that, what are some signs they should be looking for? Obviously, if they're starting to isolate, it's obviously one of them. Would I not be correct on that?
Yeah, isolation is one of the telltale signs. So if a friend becomes disconnected, there's probably something going on. But what I like to tell people is that like this thing can take a lot of different forms, and
Mm-hmm.
there's usually an underlying mental health condition. You know, so if your friend is suffering from depression or anxiety or bipolar, they have any number of mental health conditions, right? They are 3 to 5 times more likely to develop a substance use disorder. You know, we just know that they are going to need something to cope with that if they don't address it. And so, if you know that your friend has something significant going on mental health wise, you should always be checking in with them, seeing how they're doing, progressing through that, how they're coping with it, and offering your support.
Yeah, definitely.
But as far as our friends go, I think we always have this inkling, this gut feeling that like something's off, you know? Like
Yeah,
I
right.
don't know. I laugh. I have this fantasy football league I'm in with 12 of my friends. We all grew up in Madison or Milwaukee, Wisconsin. A
Oh,
very
okay.
heavy, a
Midwest. I like
very
it. Okay.
a very heavy drinking state, and I think there's 6 of us in recovery now. you know but it started with one of us, right? Like one of us
Yeah.
asked for help, and all of a sudden as we peel back the layers, like we've seen how many of us are struggling with this thing. And so I always say like the best thing you can do, right, is to be honest about what you're going through, right? Like you being honest with what you're going through is going to help somebody else be honest with what they're going through, because no matter how much you check in with somebody, right, if they're not ready to ask for help, they're not going to tell you what's going on. So be
Mm-hmm.
honest about what you're going through, be vulnerable with your friends, and you will be met with vulnerability back. But I think that's us as a society not trying to hide, but rather just letting people know like this is where I'm at, this is what I'm going through, and it's okay. You know, if you're going through something similar, I'm not going to judge you. I'm going to be here
Yeah.
to support you.
No, I agree 100% with you there. It had to be interesting though when you started revealing it one at a time. You started realizing how many of you guys were having the same problem, and then it's like,
Yeah.
well, okay, now you guys can unify because it's like,
Yeah.
well, okay, well, I know Blake's struggling too, so if I need, I can hit him up or I can hit, and it's always great and a great relief to know that you have a support system then too, because then someone can reach out to you or one of the other guys can reach to somebody else, and things like that. And I think that's the hardest part is asking for help though, because when a lot of people are faced with a lot of these things, they don't know what to say. Like, let's take suicidal ideation for one of them, just be honest. It's like when that topic comes up, people panic, man. They start like worrying, like, oh God, what do I do when this person's saying something to me like this?
Mhm.
And I think that's the problem that we're having now is that not enough of us are educated or not enough knows what to do in this situation. And,
Mhm.
like you said, it's like, they're coming to you telling you these things. They're being vulnerable to tell you these things. Like, take that as a good sign that they're trying to talk to you and ask for help. Don't shy away from it. If the conversation gets uncomfortable, it's going to get uncomfortable either way, honestly, depending on what they're about to tell you. You don't know what they're going to say next. You just keep that in mind, though. If they're talking to you, that's the best part, is at least they're talking to you, because they can do the direct opposite, say nothing, and then they can be a negative statistic that we don't want.
Mm-hmm. Most people are just looking to be heard. They're not looking for a specific piece of advice. They're not looking for the one magic word that's going to fix everything. They just need somebody to hear them and ultimately show them, like, I'm in your corner.
Exactly.
Most of us are looking for that. And so the best thing you can do in those situations is to actually just listen, and then consult somebody with expertise in this area to say, okay, here's what it looks like to be supportive to somebody going through this. Here's what you should do. To your point, if you're dealing with something like suicidal ideation, most of us are not equipped to handle that.
Exactly.
Right. So what you can do is you can listen, you can tell them that they are loved and that they're cared for and that you want them to be here. And then you can contact somebody and figure out, how do I really address this situation? Right. Because it's beyond my scope of work. But we all have that capability to listen. Right. And having that person be heard is what they need in that moment, whether they know it or not. Like, that's what they need to keep going until you can get some help in terms of intervening with the situation.
Yeah, no, you're right there. And and it comes to like substance abuse and things like that. Do you have any suggestions for them? Like, hey, listen, I got a friend who's self-destructive. Do you have any suggestions, like what they can do in that situation? Is there like a way that maybe you can try to convince them a little bit to try and get some help? Or is it going to be one of those situations where they got to hit rock bottom to figure out that maybe it's time to get something changed?
Yeah. My advice is good luck. No, on a serious note, like,
Yeah.
anything worth changing has to come from internal spaces, right?
Yeah.
If I picked a problem that you had and I sat here and I told you to change it right now, you're not going to change it unless you really want to change it.
Exactly.
And
Good
so,
point.
as a person, we have to surrender to ourselves in whatever form or fashion that looks like, right? We have to surrender to the problem. We have to accept that this is a real problem that we want to change. And then we've got to go about the very painful process of changing it. And human beings do not like to do that. We don't like to change. We like to stay the same. We like to do what we're comfortable with. So the best thing you can do is, if you have somebody who's suffering from substance abuse, right? Don't tell them what to do. Don't tell them to go get help, but just offer to listen to them, offer to hear what's really going on, ask them where they're at, ask them if they've ever had any thoughts of quitting, or if there's any support you can offer them. Because ultimately, are you getting feedback? My headphones just died.
I'm so figured. I'm like, oh no, his headphones went out on him.
Yeah. Are you getting feedback?
No, you're good, bro. You're
Okay.
totally good, man. Blake, you're awesome, man. Keep going. You're great.
All right. I just want to make sure it wasn't coming through. So the best thing you can do is just sit there, offer to listen, offer to be that person in their corner, and ultimately start to get a gauge of where they're at, because there will be that moment that they wake up and they're so miserable and they just want to do something different. And the person they're going to reach out to is the one who's always sat there and patiently listened.
Yeah.
They're going to reach out to the person that they don't think will judge them, that don't think will shame them. And so you can build yourself into a position of being there, but you have to be patient with the person. It's the hardest thing ever when you see them burning their lives to the ground, to truly just sit there and be patient with them.
Yeah, well, it had to be hard for yourself, though. I mean, 14 times lethal level of blood alcohol level, man. That had to be killing somebody there, man. Like these guys had to be like, well, like, man, what is this guy going to change? Or because it had to be horrible for everybody watching you go through that, especially when you were doing it just like that, because that's some serious stuff, man. And obviously you're here for a purpose, because obviously you made it through that to come back to share your story with everyone else, and and use your own life experiences to help other people, get to a better place.
Yeah. I had to lose a lot, you know. I did my best to burn my relationship with my family to the ground. I wasn't fully successful, but I sure did my damnedest, you know. My ex-wife, you know, I burned that relationship to the
Yeah.
ground. Eventually I lost some jobs. Eventually I, you know, had to move out of my house. Eventually a lot of things had to happen for me to be humble enough to say, like, I don't got this. I need serious help, you know?
Yeah.
And I wish it didn't have to be that painful for a lot of us, but you know, again, like change only happens when the pain is too much, right? When the pain of changing is less than the pain we're experiencing, then we're in a position where we're willing to change. And unfortunately, as human beings, like our threshold for pain is pretty high, you
Yeah.
know, and especially when the thing that we're escaping the pain from gives us a temporary reprieve, you know. So the alcohol gives you a temporary break from that pain. And so what we do is we just go to it more often and more often. We need more and we need more and we need more to deal with the pain. And eventually it stops working. And that's where the change happens, you know, is when that last thing that was helping me deal with all this pain stops working. Then it's like, what do I do? I'm stuck in between. If I drink, I'm miserable. If I'm sober, I'm miserable. And so clearly, like, something has to change here.
Right, exactly. And and like you said, it's hard for people to watch it happen though, man. It's like you just gotta sit back and try and be as supportive as you can because like you're watching this person literally kill themselves by drinking or doing
Mhm.
drugs or whatever they're doing. It's the hardest thing because I've had a friend that had a problem like that too. He drank a lot and things like that, and it was hard to watch, man, because it's like you're watching them self destruct, but you can't do anything to help them because all and you don't want to make that mistake of telling them, hey, go, you need to go get help. Like they don't care. They don't want to hear none of that. They don't want to hear that at all. And, it's a hard process to watch. It's not fun at all. Like, I think like when Shameless shows, Frank over there doing all that stuff, okay, it's great for the moment, but like for the person that's dealing with that and other people that are having to deal with that situation, it's horrible because you don't know if this person's going to wake up again, or they may OD on something, or God forbid anything else happens to them, that they don't know happened, or they get so drunk they end up walking into something, doing something stupid, and then they're like, oh, well, I don't remember any of it, and then it's like, well, what did you do, man?
Yeah. Drunk people are not the smartest, you know, and
Love it. He's like,
it's
yeah, man, drunk people are not the brightest people in the bunch.
yeah. And what's funny though about addicts in general is that like they tend to actually be some very high IQ people.
Mhm.
Like I'm always amazed in treatment at how logically smart most of the people here are. They're very intelligent on a logical level. On an emotional level, it's a different story. And so the trap that a lot of them get into, and I know I found myself in, is that like um, we we know the problem, right? Like we can see the effect it's having on our lives, and we try to ration and reason our way out of it, right? And so that person that you're trying to support, it's not that they're not doing anything. They're just looking at this situation and they're applying logic to it, you know? And logic
Yeah.
would say that if something is impacting my life to a certain extent, then I'll just stop using it. Right. I just have to tell myself I'm not going to drink again. And then I won't drink again because I've seen the damage this does to my life. And unfortunately, addiction is not a logic based problem. It's very illogical and it's very much rooted in the emotional part of the brain. And so you'll see people that have tried to reason their way out of it for years and years and years. It's not that they're not trying to do the work, but they're applying the wrong set of tools. They're applying a logical set of tools to a problem that won't respond to them. And so, what we teach people here is how to push that logic and judgment aside, right? Like, everybody comes into treatment saying, like, why can't I just quit? You know, like,
Right.
obviously,
Exactly.
I have a problem. I see that I have a problem. So, like, why isn't it as easy as me recognizing the problem and doing something different? And that's just not a tool set that works within sobriety. You've really got to attack this from an emotional standpoint and understand what's underlying the coping mechanism, because the coping mechanism is the result of whatever you're dealing with in your life or that's left unresolved in your life. And we've got to work on those things before we can alleviate the alcohol or the drugs.
Yeah, definitely. And like you said, you had to get to the root of the problem, what it is. Identify what it's exactly causing you that want to use to try and silence whatever it is. It could have been something that happened as a kid, or something traumatic you went through, or or you're trying to escape something, and things like that. And it's crazy because when it comes all down to it, it's like these things are so readily available. It's scary, man. Like, you can go in any store and start buying a lot of this stuff, and people just don't think about it. Like, how easy it is to get addicted. I know when it comes to certain like painkillers and things like that people are really cautious about it now. They're not so quick to hand them out anymore, because a lot of those are very addictive drugs to give to people, and stuff like that. And they red flag you and all that kind of stuff in the hospitals if you start showing up too much, and it's an interesting cycle to see, though, because it's like before they used to push these on everybody all the time. Oh, it's fine, we'll put you on pain management, not thinking about how much they're giving you. And then, you're trying to regulate it. And then it's like, then it's like, oh, wait, they're bad for us now. It's like, wait, you just gave these to me. Now you're telling me they're bad now. It's like, what? So are you guys using any like newer age technologies and things like that? Some new stuff that they haven't seen before,
Yeah, I don't know if they're like newer technologies, but the problem that underlies addiction has changed in a lot of ways. Like 20 years ago, you'd see people that didn't recognize the dangers of alcohol or narcotics. Like, hey, I was prescribed this by a doctor. I was prescribed benzos. I was prescribed pain medication. I was prescribed whatever, and they end up addicted to it. Or alcohol, I always thought was safe because it was in the liquor store,
Right.
And so I think we've done a good job as a society of recognizing the dangers of even things like marijuana and alcohol.
Mm-hmm.
I think the problem has really shifted to mental health, right? And so like, it's not that we're using new technologies, but what we're doing is like, we have to address the mental health issues before we address the addiction issues. So it used to be that if somebody came into an addiction center, it was likely you'd put them through a 12-step program, and you would offer them some form of cognitive behavioral therapy, right? You'd look at this as a thinking problem. Here's how you're thinking. Here's how you need to reframe it. Here's how you need to think about it differently, right? Here's how you need to spin it in your head. That doesn't work with significant trauma, and it doesn't work with significant mental health. Mm-hmm. And there's so many layers to the mental health issues, and one of the biggest ones we see is that like kids are getting help earlier and earlier today for their mental health, which is great. They're going into the doctor's office. They're telling their doctor they have a problem. They get referred to a psychiatrist, and the psychiatrist supports that kid. Unfortunately, like the kid at the age of 11 or 12 gets labeled with depression or anxiety. And so what happens every time they have a depressive episode, they go, oh, there's my depression again. Oh, there's my bipolar again. Oh, there's my anxiety again, And what it does is it starts this reinforcing loop in the brain, right? That is like, hey, I identify with this disorder. I identify with what I've been diagnosed with. And so we see that it's deeply ingrained in the brain that the person identifies with their diagnosis. And so what we're having to do is like sort of peel back the layers of okay, you get this diagnosis, you take this pill, and you should feel better. We're having to look at, well, why did you why did you develop the depression in the first place? Why did you develop the anxiety in the first place? Why did you develop this in the first place? Because all that happened when you were a kid is you were labeled and given a couple pills for it. You were never taught to address it. You were taught like, hey, here's the Band-Aid approach to fixing this. And in most cases, it's actually had the opposite effect. It's actually forced people to think like they have a problem all the time, feel like they're different, feel like there's something abnormal about them. And it doubles down on how they feel about themselves. They feel worse about themselves because of this label. And so I really think it's more of a complex issue these days.
No, yeah, sorry, I didn't mean to try and cut you out there, but you're right though, because a lot of people, when they tell them certain diagnoses, they're just looking at them crazy, like, what is that? And then if you start digging into it and telling them what they are, a lot of people are just like, what? What the hell is that? You know what I mean? And it's so interesting because, everybody likes to say, oh, I'm depressed, or I have anxiety. It's like, those are the ones that you hear a lot of, but there's so many other ones that have a lot of problems. Like BPD is very interesting. When you get into it, it gets very complex when you break it down. It runs very close to bipolar as well, and that's a whole. And then there's different levels of bipolar. You know what I mean? It gets interesting, and I think that's the problem. A lot of times with people with therapy, it's just like I hear a lot of people say, "Oh, I don't want to get pills instantly," and it's not like that anymore. Like that's not the go-to now. There's so many different things out there that you can try that'll you may get a better result out of that. It works better for you versus just going to a doctor and thinking they're going to give you a pill for something that's going to fix all your problems, or like you said, they start taking their disorders and just start, oh well, I have anxiety, so this is my problem I'm having. Instead of dealing with the problem, they're trying to use it as like a scapegoat to get out. Oh well, that's just who I am because I'm depressed, or that's just the way I am because I have anxiety. And it's complete nonsense. It honestly is. I did a video on TikTok and I had a guest on the show. She had said this thing. She said, my name's Whitney, and listed off everything she dealt with. She said that these are my diagnosis. This is not me. These do not identify me. It's the main point of what she said. And I said the same thing. I went on and I said, hey, my name's Pete. I have these things. These don't identify me as a person. I deal with these, but they are not my definition. Unlike what you were saying, it's a lot of these younger kids are like, well, I got anxiety and things like that. They're doing the wrong direction. I think it's more you deal with these things. This doesn't identify you as a person. I think that's what a lot of people need to realize is just because you have anxiety doesn't mean that defines you as a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, you mentioned borderline. I think that's a great one. We see a lot of borderline in treatment centers because borderline traits make you inherently unlikable to the average person. You're very explosive, you're very reactive, like you do a lot of things because of borderline personality that creates isolation, and that isolation often leads to addiction. Yeah. And so what often happens, right, is somebody will come in and we'll start talking about their borderline. They've been diagnosed with it for 12 years. And then they go to one of our residential houses and they have a blow up with somebody over the dishes. And I bring them into my office and we talk about the blow up. And the first thing out of their mouth is, well, of course I blew up that way. I have borderline personality disorder.
Yes, that's exactly
and it's
what I'm
like
talking about.
Whether you have borderline personality disorder or not, right? You have to address the issue. Borderline personality disorder does not give you permission to ignore how you're treating other people. We can recognize how much more difficult it is for you, and we can recognize that this is going to take you a long time to work through, but it doesn't excuse you from trying to do the work. And it's the same thing with any diagnosis out there, right? A diagnosis is not to be used to explain away your behavior. Explaining away the behavior is telling the world, like, I have anxiety, so you need to make the world adapt to me and my anxiety. Right. And that is not the way the world works. You have to make your anxiety, your depression, your borderline meet the world where the world's at. And so that's what we really challenge people to do here is like, do not fall back on your diagnosis as your excuse for everything in your life, right? Like we can be empathetic towards it. We can work with you on it. We can recognize how these behaviors show up, but there's this ownership you have to have that's like, this has to change, right? Like I have to do something productive with it. Otherwise, what are we doing here? We're just making you sicker at the end of the day.
Yeah, you're right, though. That's just, I hate it when people do that, though. They're like, oh, well, I have this, that's why I act like this. I'm like, okay, so now you're just making more excuses. You're just giving up oh, well, because I have BPD, I can't, I can't act like a normal person. I'm like, you can. It's just a little harder for you. And I met somebody with borderline personality disorder. I didn't even know until she told me. I noticed some weird things she would do, and it was a little out of the ordinary to me. But I've just like, ever since I've been doing this podcast, I've really been more fascinated by things. And I started noticing like weird things she would do. I'm like, and I asked her, I said, hey, why do you do that? She just laughed at me. And eventually she went and told me that, oh, yeah, I have BPD. And I said, what is that? I'm curious. So I dug into it. And that's when I really found out what this girl deals on a daily basis. I'm like, dude, I am so fascinated by this. Please tell me more, and she was telling me more about it. But she never used it as an excuse, though. That was the thing. Like, you never know. She'd walk around, do everything she's going to do. You didn't even realize the eternal struggle she had just dealing with everything. And, each person I've met that's had it, they all have their own different description of how they feel about it. Like, I've had Lucy Lenore Hunter came on. She was like, she questions who she is every single day versus the girl that I worked with. She was like, I have a lot of mood swings and things like that. That's, switch around for her, and she cycles her emotions and things like this, what she was saying. So everybody experiences it differently, but none of these people have used it as an excuse for any of their behaviors at all.
Yeah. Yeah. There's somebody I've listened to quite a bit in my life has said, we kind of fall on two ends of the spectrum, and we're either a victim or we're a survivor.
Mm-hmm.
And in both of those situations, whether I'm a victim or a survivor, I was handed a deck of cards that wasn't fair. In both of those situations, right? Like, what was handed to you was not fair. But the victim says, like, because I was handed this shitty deck of cards, right? This is how I play the game of life. And the survivor says, like, I was handed this shitty deck of cards. Now what? What do I do next? Like, how do I go about tackling this problem in a way that's productive for me? And that's really the difference, I think, in life, right? Is like, it doesn't change what you've been through. It doesn't change how people can empathize with you. But at the end of the day, right, like, you have to have a survivor's mentality. You have to have this mentality that just because I was handed this thing in my life doesn't mean my life ends here. It doesn't mean that, like, I just get to sit in this world of misery for the rest of my life. Like, I want to do something different. I want to overcome this,
Yeah.
And it's not easy, but people will ultimately meet you where you are if you are putting the effort in. I see this all the time with people struggling with mental health stuff here at our facility. When they use it as an excuse, people distance themselves. They don't want to be around people like that. But when people say, here's what I'm really struggling with, and here's what I'm doing to change it, people love those people, and they don't act that much differently. But at the end of the day, knowing that that person is putting the work in makes people gravitate towards them. It makes people get in their corner and want to support them.
Yeah, because it feels great when somebody supports you, just like you support anything. And especially when they have the right mentality and they're trying to change and not make excuses for their behavior. It's like, okay, well, this is what I'm currently dealing with. And I feel like it goes back to your vulnerability statement. They're being vulnerable, telling someone, hey, this is what I'm dealing with, man. And that's why the people gravitate towards them, is though, because they're like, oh, well, this guy's being completely honest, or this girl's being honest. Like, let's cheer them on. And it feels great to cheer somebody on because, it always goes back to you as well, because they'll cheer you back on too, because you supported them, and usually it's a mutual support for both everybody. And it's great when you have somebody in your corner and you don't feel like you're up in an uphill battle on your own, and it's also hard though when it comes to certain conditions though to talk to people. But I mean, I think a lot of people just need to be understanding at the end of the day. It's like, you may not understand what these people completely deal with, but understand that, they're telling you. So, it's okay to support them. And you don't have to know people either. Like, somebody randomly can come up to you and just say they're having a bad day, or they're talking about a problem they're having and relates to that. You could just be nice to them regardless. It doesn't matter. You don't have to know people. It's okay to be human with other people.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. And I think we just often forget that everybody else is just another person trying to do the best they can,
Exactly.
And there's a very simple book called The Four Agreements. think it's like required reading in every treatment center, but it basically talks about like these 4 principles for life, and one of the ones in there is like, don't make assumptions and always do your best, and so if we can go through life always just doing our best, and we can not make assumptions about people, like that's generally what creates the conditions for people to get better. Like if we all
Yeah.
show up and do our best is always good enough. Doesn't mean we're not going to make mistakes. Doesn't mean we're not going to have things to learn from. But if you show up and do your best, that's the best you've got. And then if we can look at other people and assume they're doing their very best based on where they're at right now, and not judge them or think, hey, they should be doing this, and this differently, right? Like then we give them the space to heal as well,
Yeah.
So those are 2 things I just like really encourage people to think about and live by is, like all you're doing is being a person doing your best. I'm sure you and I said things on this podcast that we'll listen back to and be like, oh, I wish I had said this differently, or I wish I had done it differently. But at the end of the day, I showed up and did my best,
Exactly.
And I assume you came in here prepared to do your best. And like, if we have that shared arrangement where we both agree that that's what the other person's doing, we're both going to have some grace for each other.
Yeah. I mean, we're both at the same goal. We're all trying to promote more awareness to these things and, and stuff like that. And I think that a lot of people need to remember, though, that if you make a mistake, it's okay. We all make mistakes. Like don't worry so much about the mistakes. Like you're going to slip up. If you slip up, I mean, it happens.
Yep.
Don't beat yourself up, man. It's a rough road. Recovery's never easy. And like you said, the statistics are just insanely low. Like, don't feel like you're losing, because really you're making strides. At least you're trying to do something, and people see that when you're trying to do your best. And and that's what I think a lot of times attracts other people too, is that you see you trying to do the best you can. They see you're trying. Like when people see you're trying, like a lot of people like to support that. They're like, hey, this guy's at least trying, versus the guy that ain't doing nothing. They're gonna be like, yeah. You know what? I'm going to keep that guy at arm's length away from me, because I don't want to be a part of that situation, and it's always great though when you see people. But I think that's the one thing I do hear a lot of people say though, is like, oh, what if I make a mistake? Okay, you make a mistake. We all make mistakes. What's your problem there? I don't understand, like we all fuck up. It happens. Like, you're going to mess up. It's going to happen. You're all human. I mean, I think at the end of the day, I think everybody worries about perfectionists too much. And it's like, there's nothing perfect about anybody, man. It's like, we all have things we deal with. We all make mistakes. We all say things that we regret sometimes. It's like, at the end of the day, as long as, you admit you made a mistake and you just move on with it. I mean, you don't have to dwell on it the whole time.
Yeah. Well, we tend to live in this black and white world where we either succeed or we fail, and we either categorize things as one of those two. We either completely succeeded or we completely failed.
Yeah.
And the one thing I've learned over time is like the only time I completely fail at something is when I do something, it's not successful and I learn nothing from it. If ultimately I learn something from it, right? That's not a failure. That's a success. That's something where I tried. I did my best. Like it didn't work out the way I wanted it to, but that's okay. The outcome wasn't in my control, and then I look back on it and I'm like, what can I learn? What can I do differently? But at the end of the day, it's like, if I'm showing up and doing my best, that's always a success. That's never a failure, And so, whether it's addiction and you've relapsed, it's like you were doing your best, and so learn from it. If you just say, hey, I totally screwed up and my life's over again and I've lost all that hard work, then you failed, but if you look at it as like, okay, what can I learn from this situation? What do you have after that? You just have a set of lessons that you've learned that you can apply to the next situation.
Yeah, right? And that's a great thing. Like I said, sometimes failure teaches you new things, and a lot of people say that. A lot of successful people say that too, is that they learn a lot from their failures. Like, okay, this failed, all right, so now I learned something from it. Now I know not to do that, and I can move on. It's okay to fail. Like, no one's saying no one's going to put you on the cross and skewer you or anything, that kind of stuff, because you failed. I mean, Hey, listen, like you said, if you mess up or you fail, you fall on your face, you get back up and you just try it again. As long as you're taking away something from it, you're learning, hey, okay, well, maybe I shouldn't do that anymore. It's what matters at the end of the day, and I think that's what people need to realize is that, with failure comes a lot of times you learn the lesson that, okay, well, that didn't work. Let me try something else. And hopefully you'd hope they'd learn, but some people, they just like to keep sticking the fork in the light socket basically, but we can't help those people, but we could try.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm going to have my first client walking in 3 minutes. So
we're going to get ready to wrap up right now. Actually, Blake, we're about to start wrapping up right now, buddy. Blake, once again, thanks so much for coming. First off, I appreciate being here, man. It was great. I loved having you here. Great conversation. Do you want to go ahead and plug where everybody can find you, your website and all that? I'll have all of it down in the link below for everybody too, but give them a little shout out where to find you, buddy.
Yeah. So I am a therapist at Wasatch Recovery Treatment. We're based out of Salt Lake City, Utah. It's an amazing facility. And then on the side, I also have a business called BlakeHuntRecovery.com. I started it because I realized not everybody can afford therapy. A lot of people leave treatment, they can't afford a therapist. So I decided to build a sliding scale coaching business where I could work with people with limited financial means who still need a way to maintain their recovery, their mental health, or just need help with kind of the day-to-day management of what they're going through. So it's a pretty cool organization. I usually take every third client for free. So my third client, every time that's not a paid client, I give it away to somebody who has zero financial means as a way for them to get the help and support that they need. Because we know there's not enough of that out there.
Definitely.
Unfortunately, recovery usually means that you have to have money. I would love to see that change. And so that's what my organization's about.
Well, that's awesome. Well, everybody, we're going to wrap up this episode of Pete vs. Anxiety. Blake, once again, thank you so much for coming. I know you got to run. Guys, you know where to find me on Pete vs. Anxiety, pretty much on everything. X all the way down to TikTok. I'm on Spotify all the way down to iHeartRadio. And as always says, it costs nothing, absolutely nothing to be kind to somebody. One kind act you could do could save someone's life, or hell, you can make their day. I'm Pete vs. Anxiety, saying, hey, don't ask how your day is today. Ask how your mental health